Specialist at the SBA Small Business Administration Portland District Office. Today's agenda, I want to cover where we are with the different economic aid funding options. So we'll discuss SBA COVID-19 economic aid funding options, loan program details for the PPP and the EIDL program, as well as grant program details, the targeted EIDL advance and the SVOG, which is the Shuttered Venue Operating Grant, and then also additional assistance in resources. And of course, like Emma said, if you have questions, feel free to drop those into the chat box or wait until the end of the presentation. We have about a half hour reserved for Q&A. So where are we? Congress intended this round of COVID-19 economic aid funding to support the hardest hit small businesses and those in underserved segments, including women, minority, and veterans. And you'll see some of that manifested in the program changes that I'll talk about later in the presentation. So a summary of where we're at with the economic aid funding options. The three loan programs we have: payment protection program, the debt relief on SBA 7A 504 and microloans, and then the economic injury disaster loan and targeted EIDL, economic injury disaster loan advance, as well as the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. And I'll talk about each one of these programs in more detail. So overview of payment protection. By now, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the payment protection program. The new payment protection program expands PPP eligibility and how the funds can be used. These are some overviews that, again, I'll talk about in more detail. A borrower can select a covered period between 8 and 24 weeks. It doesn't have to be 8 or 24, it's anything in between. The new PPP program offers a second draw PPP loan option for hardest hit small businesses, allows for deduction of expenses covered with forgiven PPP loan debt on federal taxes, updates simplified forgiveness form to include PPP loans of up to $150,000. So if you have secured or intend to secure money that is up to $150,000, then the PPP forgiveness form is very simple. It shouldn't take more than 15 minutes for you to complete, which is a very welcome addition for a number of small businesses. And then great news, no longer do you subtract, if you received an EIDL advance prior to the Economic Aid Act, that amount would be reduced from the forgiveness amount. So if you secured a $100,000 PPP loan and you received a $10,000 EIDL advance, then the most that you would be forgiven is $90,000. You'd still be responsible for that $10,000. That's gone. So if you received an EIDL advance and a PPP loan, then that EIDL advance will not be deducted from your PPP forgiveness amount. All right, so the program now is divided into two categories. There's the first draw PPP and then a second draw PPP loan. So for eligible applicants that did not receive a PPP loan prior to August 9th, 2020, you would be eligible for this first draw PPP loan. So the PPP loan eligibility includes additional types of entities that I will cover in the next slide. The covered eligible expenses are expanded. So before, in order for your loan to be forgiven, you would need to spend your PPP loan on payroll costs, rent, mortgage, interest,
Anna, you are muted. Oh,
Here we go. At what point did I get muted?
just about 1 minute.
Okay, all right, so I'll just, all right. So I'll just recap and say that right now PPP is divided to two categories. There's the first draw PPP and the second draw PPP loan. So if you did not receive a PPP loan in that first round of funding prior to the Economic Aid Act, then you are potentially eligible to receive a PPP first draw loan. So eligibility, I'll talk about in the next slide. The covered eligible expenses are expanded, whereas in that first round of PPP, in order for your PPP loan to be forgiven, you needed to spend 60% on payroll costs, and then you had the option to spend up to 40% of that PPP loan on rent, mortgage interest, and utilities. Now they've expanded that to cover operations expenditures, certain property damage costs, supplier costs, and worker protection expenditures. Again, I want to reiterate, if you want to get your PPP loan forgiven, and I imagine everybody does, then you need to ensure that 60% of that loan is spent on payroll costs, and the other 40% is spent on the eligible expenses that I just listed. Now, you don't have to spend, you can spend all of your PPP funds on payroll costs, but in order for that PPP loan to be forgiven, you need to spend at least 60% of that PPP loan on payroll cost. All right. So I mentioned borrowers can select the covered period to use your PPP loan proceeds. So it could be any length between 8 and 24 weeks after your loan was dispersed, after you have the money in your bank account. Certain borrowers may request an increase in their original PPP loan amount. That's a pretty specific subset of people. And chances are, if you talk with your PPP lender, they'll let you know if you qualify for that, if you're eligible for that increase in your original PPP loan amount. You must have been in business by February 15th, 2020, and you must apply on or before March 31st when the PPP program is set to expire. So I mentioned that there has been increased eligibility for the PPP loan. So newly eligible businesses include housing cooperatives, destination marketing organizations. There are certain 501c6 organizations such as Chamber of Commerce and eligible news organizations. Still eligible as they were in that first round of PPP are sole proprietors, independent contractor, self-employed individuals, business entities, partnership corporation, LLCs, 501c3 nonprofit organizations, and 501c19 veteran organization and tribal businesses. So the general eligibility for the first draw PPP loan requires that you have less than 500 employees, so 500 or fewer. And then for the housing co-op, destination marketing organizations, 501c6, the size standard is 300 employees. Another nuance with the 501c6 is, or 501c6 organizations exclude professional sport league and organizations with the purpose of promoting or participating in political campaign or other activity. So there are exceptions to that 501c6 eligibility. If you fall into that category, then you can reach out directly and we can review whether you are eligible for the PPP loan. So second draw, what is a second draw PPP loan? For borrowers that previously received a PPP loan, you have to have less than 300 employees and suffered a 25% reduction in gross receipts. So for most borrowers, the maximum loan amount of a second draw PPP loan is going to be 2.5 times your average monthly 2019 or 2020 payroll costs, and that's up to $2 million. For borrowers in the accommodation and food service sector, so if you have NAICS code 72, the maximum loan amount for a second draw PPP loan is 3.5 times the average monthly 2019 or 2020 payroll costs, again, up to $2 million. Second draw PPP loan applicants must submit the information on SBA form 2483 SD. That you don't need to worry about because you will be applying through a PPP lender, and I'll walk you through that application process. I do want to note that in this round of PPP, the PPP lenders are much more informed on the process. And so most of them have automated application processes that walk you through and help you quickly determine if you are eligible for a PPP loan. And that's where I think if you're on the brink or undecided, not sure if you qualify for a PPP, I would work with your small business lender if they're participating in that PPP program, or you're welcome to apply through, there are so many fintech companies like PayPal and Cabbage. The list goes on that are participating in this program. And if you go through their online application process, they can quickly determine whether or not you qualify. And you have nothing to lose. There's nothing that binds you to the PPP loan. At the very least, you'll just know whether or not you qualify for that PPP loan. Second draw PPP loan eligibility. So you must have received a first draw PPP loan, and you also have to have used or will use the full first draw PPP loan amount before that second draw PPP loan is dispersed. Like I said, you have to have no more than 300 employees, and you have to demonstrate a 25% reduction in gross receipts between comparable quarters in 2019 and 2020. And I do want to note that the quarters need to be, again, I stress that the quarters need to be comparable. So if you're comparing quarter 2 2019 to quarter 3 2020, that's not going to be accepted. You need to compare quarter 2 2019 to quarter 2 2020. And these are calendar quarters. All right, so the PPP loan application process is going to be the same for first draw PPP and second draw PPP. You need to identify a PPP lender. And we always encourage that you start with your small business lender, the bank where you have your small business account, and check with them to see if they're participating in the PPP program. You can also go on to SBA.gov/lender match to see a list of all the participating PPP lenders in our area to identify which PPP lender you'd like to work with. After you identify a PPP lender, you will complete their online application, and they'll request supporting documentation for your PPP loan application. And that supporting documentation is going to be a little bit different for each, between each lender, but they'll certainly provide the list of supporting documentation that they're going to need from you up front. And then once you complete the application with a PPP lender, they submit that application to the SBA, and then the SBA reviews the application. If the SBA approves the application, they issue an SBA loan number. Once you have that loan number, then the lender has 10 days to disperse your SBA loan. Now, the difference with this round of PPP is that the SBA is checking, verifying the information that borrowers are submitting up front. And so it's taking a little more time for those applications to be processed by the SBA than in the previous round when the PPP program was first introduced. That round of checks and balances, so to speak, happened once the borrower applied for forgiveness. Now those rounds of checks and balances are happening up front. So there is a little bit of a lapse and delay between when the lender submits the application to the SBA and when the SBA issues their decision on whether or not the loan is approved. So, and this is done to reduce incidents of fraud, just because that was an issue in the previous round of PPP funding. So to recap, the PPP loan application, first draw, second draw loans opened up January 19th. March 31st is the deadline. All PPP loan applications must be submitted to the SBA by the lender. And this is when all the appropriated funding is exhausted. Sorry. This is the final deadline for the lenders to submit the application. So real quick, you find a PPP lender, you apply with that lender, the lender submits the application to the SBA, SBA reviews, they determine whether or not you're eligible for a PPP loan. Once they make that determination, the lender has 10 days to disperse your PPP loan. So all businesses probably are going into this hoping that their loan is going to be completely forgiven. If for whatever reason your loan is not 100% forgiven, know that PPP loans have a fixed interest rate of 1%. It's non-compounding, non-adjustable. There's no requirement for collateral or personal guarantees, no fees or prepayment penalties, a 5-year maturity. And for those that were issued before June 5th, it's a 2-year maturity, but you can always go back to your lender and request to extend that to 5 years. Payments start once borrower knows how much of the PPP loan will be forgiven. The lender will notify the borrower. And then if a borrower does not apply for forgiveness, payments start 10 months after the last day of the covered period. So you have at most 10 months to decide to apply for PPP forgiveness, and you do need to apply for PPP forgiveness. So on that note, PPP loan forgiveness. Borrowers must apply for PPP loan forgiveness through their lender. The lender submits the forgiveness decisions to the so the lender will review your forgiveness application. They will decide whether or not you should be 100% forgiven on that loan, on your PPP loan, and they submit that decision to the SBA. The SBA reviews that decision. They say yes, no, and then the lender will notify you on the status of your forgiveness application. So updates per the Economic Aid Act, like I said, EIDL advances are no longer deducted from the PPP loan forgiveness payment. Expenses paid with PPP loan funds are federally tax deductible, and you should consult the IRS for details on this. Expanded forgivable expenses are permissible for any unforgiven PPP loan. And then the simplified forgiveness application for PPP loans, $150,000 or less. And like I said, this is, it's a streamlined forgiveness application, only a few pages, takes approximately 15 minutes to complete, includes instructions to help complete the application. And while accompanying documentation is not necessary to submit with the forgiveness application, you should retain any documentation that you use to make your forgiveness determinations for your own records for at least 4 years. And so per the CARES Act, lenders have up to 60 days to review the PPP forgiveness applications. And then in turn, the SBA has up to 90 days to issue its decision on the forgiveness. And I'll note for those of you who have maybe applied for forgiveness already and still have not heard back from your lender, or your lender has not heard back from the SBA, you're not alone. There are some delays. The priority is to process the PPP applications, first and second draw PPP applications, and then they'll process the forgiveness application as time allows. So if you haven't heard back from your lender about the status of your PPP application, my only point is it's no reason to worry. All right, so economic injury disaster loan. This provides economic aid to businesses experiencing a temporary loss of revenue due to COVID-19. So the program was originally set to expire this past December. They extended the deadline to December 31st, 2021. So the use of proceeds, what can you use the EIDL loan on? And this is a loan. There's no forgiveness on EIDL. Working capital, normal operating expenses, such as continuation of healthcare benefits, rent, utilities, fixed debt payments. The terms are 3.75% for businesses, 2.75% interest rate for nonprofits, and 30 years, no prepayment penalty, loans over $25,000 secured by UCC filing, and then $100 is deducted from the loan proceeds for that filing. Eligibility, you have to be a qualified small business, cooperative, and agricultural enterprises with 500 or fewer employees. Before I move on with the economic injury disaster loan, I actually want to come back to the PPP loan program. So maybe some of you have already heard the Biden administration made a couple of more changes to the PPP program. So they initiated something called an exclusivity period, which is 2 weeks reserved for small businesses that have less than 20 employees. So starting February 24th, so last week, through March 9th, the PPP portal is only open to businesses who have fewer than 20 employees. And then each employee counts as one. So regardless if you have full-time, part-time, seasonal, it's a head count. And if you have more than 20 employees, then the SBA will reject the application during this exclusivity period. Now, lenders are all aware of this program change. They're aware of the exclusivity period. And so if you are in the category where you have 20 or more employees, you're still welcome to submit your PPP application. Your lender is going to hold on to that application and submit that to the SBA after the exclusivity period expires on March 9th. So you're still very much will have access to the PPP loan, first and second draw. It's just during this exclusivity period, the SBA will not be processing loans for businesses that have 20 or more employees. And that is with the goal of getting monies to the really small businesses, the smallest businesses. All right, a couple of other changes as well with the Biden administration. So before, if you had some sort of felony conviction that automatically excluded you from being eligible for a PPP loan, now if you have non-fraud related felony convictions, you will be eligible for the PPP loan. And the official guidance that the SBA will be issuing is still not out, and lenders are still waiting on that official guidance. But they are anticipating that the guidance will be out later this week, hopefully by the end of the week. And that just, it changes the application process. And so if you fit into that category, you'll likely have to use a new application to apply for the PPP loan, but your lender will have all of that information. Another change, not so much a change, but a clarification. So all lawful US residents already have access to the PPP. There was confusion on whether or not ITINs are eligible for PPP, and the SBA will issue guidance to eliminate confusion on this issue and to ensure access for non-citizen small business owners who are lawful US residents and who use an ITIN to file taxes. So an ITIN is an individual taxpayer identification number that's issued by the IRS. So if you're a non-citizen, but you have an ITIN number, then you can apply for the PPP loan. And the biggest change that's coming down the pipeline is for sole proprietor, independent contractor, and self-employed individuals. So the loan calculation is going to change. Prior to the change that was announced last week by the Biden administration, you would use your net profit to calculate the PPP loan amount. Now they're changing that to gross income. The official calculations are not out yet, but that will substantially increase the loan amount for sole proprietor, independent contractor, and self-employed individuals. So if you fall into that category, you're thinking about getting a PPP, certainly hold off until that new guidance is available. And like I said, that is probably going to be released by the end of this week, and your lenders will have all that information. There's going to be a new application that you're going to need to submit. So for those of you who have not applied for the PPP and fall into that category and thinking about applying, wait until that guidance is released, and your lenders will have that information. For those of you who fall into that category and have already applied for the PPP, then I would say that all is not lost. I think they are trying to figure out a workaround for individuals who fall into that category who would be eligible for more PPP funds. But like I said, that the guidance is just not there yet. It will be released, and your lender will be the first to know that guidance. So work closely with your lenders, check in with them, and they should be able to advise you on all of these changes to the PPP program. All right, back to economic injury disaster loan. So we talked about use of proceed, term, eligibility. It's an online application. So you would just go on to SBA.gov, look at the COVID relief options, and it will redirect you. And if you select economic injury disaster loan, it'll redirect you to that loan application. The new program within the EIDL economic injury disaster loan program is a targeted economic injury disaster loan advance. So very important to note that absolutely no action is required by an individual until you are contacted by the SBA via a direct email invite. So the new program here will balance out a previous EIDL loan advance the full $10,000 if the business is 1, in a low income community, and 2, suffered greater than 30% economic loss, 3, has 300 or fewer employees. So those who applied for the EIDL advance but didn't receive funds due to lack of funding will receive the full $10,000 if they meet the same requirements above and per the targeted EIDL advance funding availability. So effectively, there are 2 categories, 2 targeted priority groups. Those who received part of an EIDL advance, less than $10,000 when they were still issuing, when the SBA was still issuing the EIDL advances. And then the second priority group is those who did not receive an EIDL advance because the money ran out in that first round of funding. So the most important point that I want to stress is there's nothing that you need to do until you get that email invitation from the Office of Disaster Assistance, SBA ODA. And in that, they're going to say, based on our records, you fit into one of these 2 categories, and you're eligible for up to $10,000 in EIDL grant money. And then you will need to complete an application. There's certain criteria. You have to make sure that you're located in that low income community, and in that email invite, there'll be a mapping tool, an online mapping tool to help you determine if you fit into one of those low income communities. And then you will need to demonstrate that you suffered greater than 30% revenue loss. So you'll need to complete a workshop, a worksheet to demonstrate this revenue loss with reductions between 2019 and 2020. All right, so with that targeted EIDL advance, if you do receive an email invitation from the Office of Disaster Assistance, SBA Office of Disaster Assistance, the items needed to verify eligibility include your 2019 federal tax return, your EIN, SSN as specified in your original EIDL application, gross monthly receipts for 2019, 2020, and completed months in 2021. You'll have to confirm that the information in your original EIDL application is still accurate, and they'll walk you through that through an online process. And then applicants that pass the initial eligibility requirements will be required to sign a 4506T for the SBA to obtain tax transcripts before the agency can approve the targeted EIDL advance. All of this is done to ensure that there is absolute minimum fraud with this EIDL advance program. Unfortunately, we did see a number of fraud cases, both in EIDL and PPP. So in this round of funding, they're taking all necessary precautions to ensure that we don't run into more fraud cases. And on the note of your tax transcript, it's important for you to review what you reported on your taxes versus what's stated on your financial statements. Make sure that information aligns, because if it does not, then that's going to send a flag to the Office of Disaster Assistance and will likely result in rejecting your EIDL advance. So you want to review that information before you submit the information to the Office of Disaster Assistance. There's also, oh, actually here, let's talk about the application process. So for that targeted EIDL advance, only one submission for each targeted EIDL advance can be made. Carefully review the information because you will not have an opportunity to make corrections. Once you submit your information to ODA, that's it. There will be no opportunities for reconsideration because of a typo or an error, or you might have missed something up front. So it's very important to pay attention to those details before you submit your information to the SBA. So the SBA's goal is to process completed applications within 21 days. Applications may not be considered complete until after the IRS form 4506T is received, so that you granting permission to the SBA to get your transcripts, tax transcripts from the IRS. So application questions should be sent to targeted advance at sba.gov. And if you're approved, you'll receive an email and an ACH deposit to the bank account provided. Again, all of this will only be relevant if you receive that email invitation from SBA Office of Disaster Assistance, and they'll outline all of these instructions in that email invitation. So a new program in this round of funding is the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. Applications are not open yet, but if you do fit into this category, if you fall under these eligible entities, include live venue operators or promoters, theatrical producers, live performing arts organization, motion picture theater operators, relevant museum operators, zoo, aquarium, who meet the specific criteria, talent representatives, and up to the 5 business entities owned by an eligible entity that also meet the eligibility requirements. So if you fall into any one of these eligible entities, know that this is a grant program. The application is not open yet, but if you're thinking about applying, that you will need to register in sam.gov as a potential SBA grant recipient. So as something that you can do proactively, certainly go and register your business on sam.gov. So some other things to consider, you must have been in operation as of February 29th, 2020. And then the venue or promoter must not have applied for or received a PPP loan on or after December 27th. So this is an important point to note. You cannot apply both for the PPP and the SVOG grant. And this matrix helps you determine what you are and what you're not eligible for. So if you are a recipient of PPP, you can apply for a second draw PPP loan. You may apply for the SVOG grant if you received a PPP loan prior to December 27th, 2020. But if you're thinking about applying for, a PPP loan in this round of funding, and you're also thinking about applying for that SVOG, I can't repeat myself enough. You have to make a decision whether to apply for PPP or the SVOG. You cannot apply for both. Now, with the economic injury disaster loan, you can apply both for PPP, you can apply for SVOG, but you must make sure that the proceeds aren't used for the same purpose or cost. And you can't apply for more than one EIDL loan, or in this case, for more than one SVOG, Shuttered Venue Operating Grant. So this matrix, I can share this after the presentation for you guys to look at in a little bit more detail. It just cleanly kind of delineates what is permissible and what's not permissible in terms of applying for the different economic aid that's available through the SBA. All right, SBA-backed loan debt relief. So if you currently have an SBA 7A 504 or micro loan, then you will, the SBA is providing debt relief and payments on SBA-backed loans. The amount of the additional assistance will depend on the availability of funds. This debt relief is not available to loans made under the Payment Protection Program. If you do have either an SBA 7A 504 or micro loan, then your SBA lender will reach out to you and inform you that you qualify for this debt relief program. You'll receive a letter from the lender. So key takeaways, 3 loan programs. We have the Payment Protection Program. And if you use the expenses, if you use the loan for the eligible expenses outlined at the beginning of the presentation, then your PPP loan could potentially be fully forgiven and effectively a grant. But you do need to use the loan proceeds on the eligible expenses outlined at the beginning. The debt relief on 7A 504 and microloans, again, that information will come from your lender, and chances are if you fit into that category, you have already received a letter from your lender. Economic injury disaster loan, it is a loan that you will need to pay back. There's no forgiveness on the economic injury disaster loan. It's a working capital loan. But the targeted EIDL advance, that is a grant. And like I said, if you fit into one of the 2 targeted priority groups that will be receiving an email from ODA, the Office of Disaster Assistance, you'll know that ODA will send you an email. So there's nothing that anybody can do to apply for a targeted EIDL advance until you receive an email invitation from the Office of Disaster Assistance. Shuttered venue operators grant, the application process is not open yet, but the FAQs are published on SBA.gov. If you fall into that category of businesses that would qualify for the Shuttered venue operators grant, review all the FAQs, get yourself registered on sam.gov so that when they open up the application, you have all the information that you'll have all the information that you need to submit with the application ready to go. And that way you can just get everything uploaded and submitted to the SBA. So a couple of local resources for you guys to consider. The Portland District Office, our website's here. We're located in downtown Portland. Obviously, we're all working remotely from home, but we are here and available. SCORE, it's a network of volunteer business advisors that can meet with you to discuss any one of these programs, and then all sorts of business needs that you may have. So they are very much small business advisors there to help you navigate your small business questions. Likewise, Oregon Small Business Development Center and the Women's Business Center. All of these organizations are well equipped to help you navigate and answer questions, again, specific to the economic aid programs that are available, or just general business questions that you may have. Some ways to stay connected. We have our newsletter. If you go on to sba.gov/updates, you can subscribe to the newsletter, follow us on Twitter. Our office email is pdxhelp@sba.gov. 503-326-2682 is our direct phone line. We're here, ready to help. And with that, I want to open up to questions.
Thank you, Anna.
Lots of
so
information.
much. Yeah, so much information and a lot of really good news.